Hello, and welcome to another episode of our Ellie.Talks podcast, your insights into the world of sustainable textiles and fashion. My name is Julie Litaire. I'm the founder of Ariadne Innovation. And today, for once, we're not in the podcast studio, but at the office. It was a little bit too far for our guests to join us physically to travel all the way to Kortrijk for this podcast. Today, we'll talk about a team that has been quite some time on our radar, but with the complexity of the topic, we wanted to wait a perfect expert today before covering it. So, according to Jo van Landehem from Crea Moda, one of our previous speakers, our guest today was a perfect partner to interview. So I'm very happy to welcome all the way from Sweden, virtually with us today, Dr. Anna Lennquist, Senior Toxicologist at ChemSec. Dear Anna, welcome to our virtual podcast. We have not had the chance to meet in person, but I'm very happy that you're with us today. So before we dive into the topic of today's podcast, can you maybe tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself? Who is Anna?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. There is some construction work outside, so you have to just say if there is too loud, but I hope
it's perfect.
Okay, good. Yes, so I'm Anna. I'm working for an environmental NGO, but I'm a biologist and a researcher by training. And when I had done my master thesis, I realized that I've always wanted to work for the environment in some way. And I felt a little bit in the lab, I didn't really feel that I did something concretely that changed the world, even if I improved the knowledge. So I decided to study journalism for a while because I figured that if something is in the newspaper, that really has an effect or can have a big impact. So I did that, but then I went back to science again, and I've sort of had this balancing through my life that I want to dig into the science, but I also want these things to come also to policymakers and to really make a difference in the end. And there was really no connection there. So I was very happy when I found ChemSec, where I work today, because I feel we are really that kind of organization that tries to bridge that gap, so that we are aware and following the science, but not really sitting in the labs ourselves. But then talking to companies and policymakers and the ones that can really then make a difference in the real world. So yeah, there was maybe a bit longer background.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's great to get to know the person whom I'm talking to today. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on ChemSec? What kind of services do you provide and what industries are you working for?
Yes. So we are an environmental NGO, so we are founded by 4 Swedish large environmental NGOs to work specifically on chemicals. And so we are a quite small organization. We're based in Gothenburg, but we work almost only on the EU level or a global level with regulation and with companies and so forth. But we're not a consultancy in that sense. We don't take money from companies, or we don't charge for the work we do, but instead we search for different kinds of fundings from charity funds and research funds and so forth to do what we do. So the services that we provide, they are always free of charge, and they are sort of on a quite general level, because we don't go in and work specifically with individual companies, but we try to provide general and useful guidance for companies to get started in the chemicals management. So, for example, we have the SIN list, which is a list of substances that are likely to be regulated in the near future because they fulfill the regulatory criteria, but they have not yet come up on that candidate list. Mm-hmm. That is one way to have a look at that list and see how we are doing. And then we have other tools where we look at alternatives to these substances, where you can find alternatives to replace hazardous substances. We have a PFAS guide where you can understand better in what kinds of products PFAS is used and why, so that you have an understanding of if this is something relating to you and what you would need to do in your sort of organization. So it's these different kind of online things. And then we have a lot of webinars and newsletters and try to sort of general awareness and information, but in most cases, directed towards companies mainly SMEs and that kind of companies that maybe don't have these type of resources in-house. If you're a large company, you have a sustainability department or something similar, maybe that does similar kind of work. But we try to do that for the ones that do not have those resources.
Okay, and because today the Ellie ecosystem is mostly centralized in Central Europe, focused on Central Europe, of course, with growth ambition to cover the whole of Europe. But do you also work with Belgian companies? You might have some examples here in the region as well.
Yeah, I would say that we work very globally, but as I say, it's more that we put out a lot of stuff and then people come visiting our websites and our webinars. It's quite few companies where we have or it's quite many, but it's not so many that we have a very regular contact with. So sorry, I cannot mention any specific Belgian
No,
companies.
I understand. We understand. Let's maybe zoom in a little bit about your role in the company exactly. So what are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the days are quite different, I would say. So, but as I have this scientific background, I'm providing like expertise within the organization and fact checking and things like that. But then since the start, I've also been much involved in our different tools. So for example, the SIN list, which is identifying hazardous substances there. It has a lot to do with my background in looking into hazardous properties of chemicals, for example. But then it's also very much like this, being on different conversations and talks and webinars and conferences. Then we also follow the regulatory processes, and there are a lot of different committees and meetings and consultations and things where we want to provide input as much as possible. And then a lot of meetings with different companies where if we can find a collaboration or a common interest in something that is happening, we can do something jointly, like send a letter to the commission or have a meeting with a policymaker together. So those kinds of things. So since the pandemic, it's been less travel than before, but it's still some travel and meet people.
So very diversified day-to-day business. That's nice. Okay. As we have a very, broad audience, we always try to explain our topics in a very simple way. So today the topic is about chemicals, which is often kind of a black box in textiles and fashion. I think it's a very important topic. It has different layers and a lot of potential for innovation. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what are chemicals for the textile and fashion business? How are they used today in our industry?
Yes, so I mean, to the people working with chemicals, textile is seen as one of the most chemical intense industries because chemicals are used everywhere in the process. So already from the start, there can be pesticides used when you produce cotton, for example, or you have synthetic materials that come from oil, and then you have to treat those in different ways. So you have like lubricants and things to help spin a yarn, and then you have a fabric, and then you dye it, and that is chemical, and you wash it with detergents, and you have prints and so forth, and then you sew something together. And then for transport, there might be these like anti-wrinkling agents. I don't know what that's called. And you might have some mold resistance or even biocides in there, and then you ship it. So it's really like every step of the production process is using chemicals. And I don't remember those. There were a lot of figures circulating some years ago saying how much chemicals in kilo there is to make a T-shirt.
Wow.
So, and there has been these campaigns by Greenpeace, for example, detox campaign, like taking pictures of the sites in Asia where textiles are being produced and how the environment look around those factories with these very polluted rivers and environmental issues, often in countries that are not close to us, that we don't see.
Yeah. And what are the biggest challenges when it comes to chemicals when you want to go for a sustainable transition in the textile and fashion Industry?
Yes, I think it's the same for many industries. And one one key, or sort of the first step and the key challenge, is transparency, is to get the information, what has really been used in my product since the start, and where does it come from, and how it has been treated, and so forth. And at least traditionally, textile supply chains have been very diverse and long, and also that you might change quite quickly between different producers. And then, of course, all of this makes the information flow more difficult. So the first thing you have to do in order to get more control about the chemicals management is, of course, to get a better control of the supply chain, so that you really get the information about chemicals along the whole supply chain. And I think that's unfortunately a main challenge for the textile industry specifically.
And do you see that as a challenge for the textile industry, or do you see the same thing for other applications and industries as well?
I think all industries we talk to have this as a problem. Then some industries or some very large companies can have a more limited number of suppliers that they know better and have more close contact with. But as with the companies we talk to, there are very, very few that have sort of full material disclosure and full control of everything that's in their products. And they have put a lot of effort to get such a system into place. And then there are all kind of levels from that to knowing nothing in between.
Yes, I understand. So what you do is you help the companies with their chemical management system, setting these up. How does it work? Do companies find you, ChemSec, or do you reach out proactively to companies as well?
Well, I mean, we talk at these different conferences and podcasts and things like that. And we also do some digital marketing, so through social media. But it's been a lot that companies find us, I think, through extended networks and so forth. So, of course, we want to spread everything we do as far as possible, but we also have limited resources for like marketing and so forth. And we're still, the user base is constantly growing, so it's working somehow anyway. So we are working with that, but with a little bit limited resources.
Yes, we can see how we can help you with Ellie.Connect there a little bit.
Nice.
But definitely, what is also on my mind is about if companies are already realizing that they have to make a shift when it comes to chemical management as well. Have you seen a transition during the past years? I mean, or when it comes to companies looking for solutions, but as well, you know, change in these companies already? Do you see, you know, there's companies acting more than in the past?
I think so. I've been at ChemSec for 12 years now, and I think there is different. It might also be because I see all these companies. We are always very interested to find the good examples and the positive examples and nice innovations and so forth. So I also have sort of an eye for that. But there has also been some strong regulatory developments over these years. So now, for example, we have the chemical strategy for sustainability that the Commission has put forward, and it's not in place. There are a lot of different pieces in there, but they will all require a lot of more transparency and responsibility when it comes to chemicals from companies. And I think that already now a lot of companies respond to that and are more eager to get these control systems in place and to have better control on the chemicals, because it is required by regulation, and it will be required even more. And I think also that companies experience more and more that sustainability in different ways is something that also customers like. So if they can use it as a marketing advantage, it's also very beneficial. And I think also a difference since I started was that when I started, companies didn't really want to talk about what they had done in chemicals management, because they were reluctant to say, like, we used to have this bad chemical and now we replaced it, because they thought it didn't sound good. But I think that there has been a shift there, and there's a more general understanding that we are all challenged by different sustainability aspects, and we are moving towards the target. We're not perfect, but the effort in itself is something that is seen as positive. So my experience is that more and more companies dare to say, like, what they have done and also what they plan to do, even if they are not there yet. And it doesn't seem like that is being sort of punished by customers or similar, but rather seen as positive.
Yeah, so instead that the word chemical itself is seen as a bad thing, you also have transitioned towards more green chemicals, green chemistry. Is this a new topic? Is this something that is linked to the changes in legislation, or is this something that has always been there but gets more more attention right now?
I think a little bit of both. Some companies and some regulations have been progressive since a long time, and some companies have used restriction substances lists and things that go beyond regulation for quite many years. But I think it's becoming more and more common, and it's more and more discussions. And one discussion that is on the table right now is safe and sustainable by design, which is not yet in place, and there are also different kind of similar concepts, sustainable chemistry and so forth. And the sort of the idea or what has been missing until now is how to properly weigh the impact of hazardous chemicals against other sustainability measurements. So water use or climate change or even like child labor and things. How can we weigh all these things into one measure? And there is no such system yet in place, I would say, that is perfect, but that is really something that would be very useful and that everybody is sort of looking for. I think traditionally when you're using, for example, life cycle assessments, chemicals have been a little bit not so important in there, or they have not really been acknowledged as the problem they are. So there is really room for improvement when it comes to that, and there are a lot of discussions on how to do that best.
Yeah. So one reporting tool based on all the SDGs, then maybe also diversity in gender diversity as well as social conditions. Yeah, I understand that's. But that's a whole tough.
There's no SDG specifically for chemicals, which is a little bit problematic. But it goes into all the other things like biodiversity and water quality and all of those things. But there is no one SDG for chemicals, which also can make it go away a little bit from their focus.
Yeah, maybe ChemSec can create another one to put some focus on that as well.
Well,
yes. Try to.
It's difficult, yeah.
Okay, we talked a little bit about legislation, so I understand that, of course, legislation in this part plays a big role. Is there any specific legislation when it comes to textiles and fashion that you want to highlight, point out to our listeners as well? We know the REACH legislation already for a whole lot of years, but what about this new green chemistry?
Yes, we are working very much with REACH, so that is also what we know best, and textiles are covered there. And there has also been a bit unusual as a sector that there are also these more general restrictions for textiles, for CMRs, for example, carcinogenic reprotoxic substances.
Wow, complicated.
Complicated. So there has been quite a lot of focus on the textile industry in the REACH regulation, I would say. And that is also what I know best. There is not so much more to say than that there is an upcoming revision of REACH, and that is still being discussed. And there is also this chemical strategy for sustainability. So there are a lot of regulatory changes in the pipeline, but they are not really there yet. But it's important to follow what's happening there, of course.
So you would advise companies to look at the future REACH guidelines, but also at your SIN list, if I understand correctly. Is that applicable for textiles as well to have a look at?
It is. You can sort the SIN list also for uses. We have tried to. That's always difficult to find good information on where chemicals are actually used. But we have tried to do that, so you can filter the SIN list for textiles. We also, for quite many years ago, we made a guide for textile industry specifically. It's a little bit outdated when it comes to the database, but the information part that explains how and why chemicals are used in the textile industry is still is still correct and relevant also.
Okay. So we will definitely have a look at that and maybe share it again if that's
Yes.
that would help. Definitely, there's one chemical which is which has a lot of attention, has had a lot of attention in the textile industry, and that's the PFAS. If I can call it a chemical, can you maybe explain a little bit more on what PFAS is and why it is so important to watch this?
Yes, definitely. That is one of the main issues we are working with now, and it's the same for many stakeholders. So PFAS is actually a group of substances, and there are different figures on how many there are, somewhere between 5,000 and 6 million, but something like that. And what's problematic with this group is that they do not degrade in the environment or in our bodies. So they are also called forever chemicals in public media and so forth. And since they do not degrade, the levels are building up all the time. And what has been seen now is that levels in the environment, for example, in rainwater, is getting so high that they are getting to the same levels as what would be considered as safe for drinking. So the levels in the environment are coming close to the levels where you see health effects and also environmental effects. So it's really urgent to stop production as far as possible, because as long as we are using and letting these out, these levels will just rise. And since they do not degrade, there's really nothing to be done on what's already out there, but we have to do something about the future. So it's actually a very big problem and very urgent. And they are also used in so many different applications, much more than at least I thought a couple of years ago. We have discussed for a long time that they are used, for example, in rain clothes for water repellency and dirt repellency. And there I think the textile industry has been very progressive and replaced these to a large extent and found and innovated new alternatives. We also know that they're used like in Teflon frying pans. It's a common example. But then we have understood through our work and what you can see also in our PFAS guide that they can be used in exactly everything. In paints and floorings, in makeup, they have so many different uses, flame retardants and so forth. So even if you think that you have sort of phased out PFAS in your production, maybe you have not if you take a closer look. So that is also a big challenge. But there is coming now a restriction under REACH, and in the EU, there is a proposal for a restriction, a universal restriction. So the baseline is that all PFAS will be banned from all products. And then there are a few limited derogations for uses where there are no alternatives yet. So it's really something that every company needs to work with quite urgently right now.
And what would you advise, because you talked about complexity and transparency in the supply chain, what would you advise then the smaller SME who is not always up to date of what chemicals are used in their supply chain, what they should do or what they should look for, or they just contact you or look at a list of applications?
Yes, I think a good place to start is to look into our PFAS guide, because there you can read more about PFAS and understand what kind of properties it has and why it is used in different types of products. So you can get a sort of red flag system and sort of understand that if I have this function in something, that might be PFAS, and then pose that question in the supply chain specifically, like is there PFAS in this product? And then we also have a database where you can search for different products and so forth and see if it's likely that there's PFAS. We also have a questionnaire that you can use to send to suppliers to ask for it. So there is some guidance there. And since this applies to all European companies, hopefully also suppliers will be more used to answering these questions and have more ready answers. So the more you ask, even if it can feel like useless and you don't get the responses you want, or you don't maybe trust the responses, I think that the more you ask, the better and the easier for everyone if these questions are being put forward, and then the suppliers need to check their suppliers and so forth. but the knowledge is building up, at least if you start to ask.
Yeah. Okay, that's the first step that people can take in the supply chain. Just ask for transparency or for the chemical list indeed of your products. That's definitely a good tip there as well. Do you see other challenges next to these PFAS products or substances when it comes to chemical management?
Yeah, I mean, one main challenge is that there are so many different chemicals that are problematic in different ways. And so it is a quite complex topic, and therefore many chose to focus on a substance group by time, for example, like PFAS, and I think that's very nice. But there are also different organizations that do help textile industry. So I don't know if you're aware of this zero discharge of hazardous chemicals, CDHC, which is an organization. I think you have to pay a member fee, but that they also have some free of charge databases and resources. Because I think that the bigger actors in textile industry have understood that even if they are big in our view, and we know their brands and we think that they are large, they have also had difficulties with the transparency. So they have realized that working together is much more efficient. And if you're a fashion brand, it's not that you lose some kind of competitive advantage if you share information on chemicals. That's not what you sell things on. So I think that those different collaborations and joint restricted substances lists and joint requirements towards suppliers makes it much easier and is much more efficient. And so I really would recommend to sort of stick to an existing list. The SIN list is one such list that is also more well known, rather than sort of invent your own chemicals management if you're a small company.
Okay. That's a good tip. So take it step by step, but start asking for transparency right now based on a base list that, of course, ChemSec can provide right now. So we actually at Ellie.Connect, we also try to stimulate SMEs to take small steps, because small steps go in the good direction is already a big step forward. So maybe just to jump into another topic, we talked a lot about production value chains, companies. What about the consumer? How do you see the role of the consumer when it comes to the shift towards a more cleaner and greener chemical environment?
I think the consumer can have a lot of power if they are also informed and can ask the right questions. I think people have been more aware maybe for buying organic food than buying organic textiles, for example. But I think it makes a big difference if customers start to ask for more sustainable options. And there is also one sort of misconception or thing that is used sometimes by chemical industry, that they say that we cannot replace these hazardous chemicals, but because the consumer expects something. It expects a certain color, or it expects a certain package or a certain smell. But I think if the consumer knew that the choice was made between a hazardous chemical and that specific smell, you would probably be fine with changing that for a different sense or feel. So I think it's also, there are some examples, for example, Coop in Denmark, a retailer that works more with also educating the consumer. So they are saying, like, we have removed this product from the shelf. It's not but we know you like it, but we have removed it because of this, and we are trying to find an alternative with safer chemicals. So it's good. So empowering also the consumers as part of the sustainability work and sort of being on a joint journey there.
And how do you believe that this much anticipated digital product passport that's coming up in Europe, will they help playing a role here in this shift towards sustainable chemicals as well? Or more transparency?
I really hope so, because transparency is, as I said, the first step, and something that is needed, and something that is important also for recycling, for example, which is a big problem. But there are still many unknowns to my understanding of what this will really be in the end. So it will depend, I think, on what chemicals will be required to disclose, and if there will be many possibilities for confidentiality, for example, then you will also lose in transparency. So it's necessary that it becomes good if it's enforced, so that it's really meaningful and that it contains as much information about as many chemicals as possible. So hopeful, but it's also necessary that it gets a good one. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, that's nice to know. Yeah, I think we're almost reaching the end of this very interesting episode. I would like to end with two questions. First of all, can you maybe share your general view on where the chemical sector is going in the future?
Yeah, that is a difficult question. I think the chemical industry has many challenges, and a main challenge is that they are so dependent on oil and fossil fuels. So that is more than 99% of the raw material for chemicals. So there is a lot of work to try to change that, and they are also, it's quite a conservative industry, and they have very expensive buildings and facilities, and therefore reluctant to change production processes and products. But the pressure is really building up now, also from financial investors that we also work with partly, that want to see more sustainable chemicals and more sustainable production, because there are coming in more and more of these litigations and fees for factories that have produced, for example, PFAS, where the costs for remediation is just crazy high, and someone has to pay for it. So it's also being more difficult for chemical producers like to insure their production facilities, because the insurance companies really see that it's very risky business. So there are a lot of challenges for chemical
It's similar,
sustainable.
I think, to the textile and fashion industry, and the challenges our European industry has here as well. So it's very, yeah, I recognize these challenges as well. But it's good that they're linked together. So maybe we can take steps together, the chemical and the textile industry, to make a better world there. So very interesting. Maybe just to give you the opportunity as well, you talked a lot about the tools for companies, for SMEs that are available at ChemSec. Can you maybe share where our listeners can find these lists and these tools?
Yeah, you can just go to our website, which is chemsec.org, and you find everything there. You can also sign up for our newsletter. Then you will always get also updates about things connected to REACH and regulation, and sort of updates from the chemical world regularly. We also have a lot of recorded webinars with information on certain topics. So that's the best starting point. And then you will find these different resources through there.
Okay. We'll definitely have a look at that. And I learned a lot about the transition in this chemical management systems, that we should take it step by step, invest a lot in transparency in our supply chain, work together to make, a bigger impact, which is, of course, what we're promoting with our Ellie ecosystem as well. If there's still one message you would like to share with the textile and fashion ecosystem, and also with the pioneers listening, wanted to make a better world here, what would be the message you would like to end with?
I think you did a great summary, actually, with small steps collaboration. I think those two are really key. It works towards more transparency on these issues, more collaborations, get them up in the light, so to say, or make it visible. And I think also if you can try to make this also a selling point and a core part of your business, I think it's important for a company also to have like management on board when you are doing these transitions, and also marketing department and the different parts of a company, that they are all working towards more sustainable and safer chemicals. Then it would be much easier, and you can also use it in marketing and be seen as a sustainable company. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anna Lennquist. We had a very nice talk about chemical management. You share the values of Ellie.Connect as well, to inspire, inform, connect for a more sustainable future. So definitely with Ellie.Connect, we will try to also leverage a little bit of your knowledge towards our ecosystem as well. So thank you very much for that. And let's make a better future together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.